I'm Pastor Wayne at Our Calling, and today we're talking about race. We're right in the middle of all the protests, which in some places have turned to rioting because of the death of Gregory Floyd. And we are in the epicenter. Our Calling is in the sphere of where the riots and the curfew is. And so we actually have to leave early every night to make sure we're not caught in that. Our cleaning crews have to leave early as well. And I thought it'd be best to get together with Rodney, a longtime friend of mine. I've known you for how long?
We're closing in on about 19 years.
Yeah. I hear a lot of, discussion about this on social media and on the news right now, and I thought it'd be good for us to talk about it here. I'm reminded, I was talking to one of my kids about this, about, why they're protesting and why it's turned to riot. I was reminded by a quote from Alfred Lord Tennyson. Alfred Lord Tennyson wrote a book it's a poem, but it's a book to his best friend after he died. Kind of, what I wish I would have told you before you died. And in there we have the, 'tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. But there's another part in there that I've always loved. He says, "So runs my dreams, but what am I? Like an infant crying in the night, an infant crying for the light, and with no language but a cry." When a baby's hungry, he cries.
Yeah.
When he's thirsty, he cries. When he's scared, he cries. When he's cold, he cries. When he's hot, when he's wet, when he's dirty, he cries. It's all the language he knows is cry.
Yeah.
And when we look at these protesters that have turned into riots, I think of that's the only language where someone will actually shut up and listen to them. Unfortunately, I see people have been begging for discussions and just begging for, let's sit down and have conversations about what you see and what you do see and what you know and what you don't know and education. But those discussions have gone mute, right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, this is a language that's gotten people's attention. Now, I'm not justifying rioting and looting and all that other violence and stuff that's going on, but the protesting is a language like an infant crying, where maybe if I protest loud enough, someone will finally listen to me and see my perspective, right? And my perspective is what I know, and your perspective is what you know. But as a white man, tell me what I don't see.
Yeah. I think one of the things that Dr. King said is, he says that rioting and looting is the language of the hopeless. And so you and I are seeing a whole generation of Black people who feel hopeless. And I believe that they feel hopeless because of the two realities that exist in America. This white reality and the Black reality. The first thing that I saw when I came here and started working, it was apparent to me early on that here existed a place where a gathering of where all of our institutions have failed. Everything we hold dear. The institution of parenting, the institution of the church, the institution of government, the institution of education. All of these institutions, everyone we see, those things fail them. And so in these realities, a white reality which you never have to enter the Black reality unless you want to. Some Black people get the rare opportunity to enter into white reality and see it. But white reality never has to enter the Black reality. And the Black reality seems to be and is, there is a huge level of injustice. There's a huge level of inequality. There's a huge level of what I want to say, hopelessness. And if this is my reality, how in the world can I achieve anything in a country that at times they don't even see me? I don't even exist. And so I think for white America, it is not that black people are bitter. I think it goes beyond bitter. I think it is, I am frustrated and I am hopeless because I see the same episodes happening decade after decade, century after century.
Last night, you suggested I watch this beautiful video. The name of it was I Am Not Your Negro. I Am Not Your Negro, yeah. And one of the things in there I thought was so interesting, it says, the story of the Negro in America is the story of America, and it is not a pretty story. James Baldwin said that. So let's just have a dialogue. Where do we start with a conversation like this?
I think you have to start where we're starting right now, and that is willing to have open dialogue and just say, hey, kind of share with me, what's going on with what's going on with you, and you're willing to listen. I think a lot of times when things like this happen, people say, I know how you feel, and they placate. But I think until you really understand the sadness, the anger, and the fact that it is another episode in a continuing story that happens in America. And one of the reasons why I wanted you to watch the video or the short documentary was you could see some of the same things that were happening in the 1960s. Some of the same kind of signs. You could see a lady in Birmingham where a police officer had his knee on her neck, right? And you just say, well, that happened 55 years ago, and that story just happened last week. So what is going to change? And so I think until we admit as Americans that it is an American issue, it's not a black issue, it's not a white issue, it is an American issue. And in some ways, Wayne, as I was getting ready and thinking about this, I was thinking about how the Jews felt about the Samaritans, right? And how it was a continual reminder of their bad sin, of what they did that created that race of people. And I'm thinking, when white people see us, when they see African Americans, it is a reminder of a group of people who were brought here, who were used for labor. That era has passed, but they are still here. And every time I see them, I am reminded of that past. And so how do we begin to really have honest dialogue and admit to ourselves, how do we make one reality versus two realities that exist in America?
Part of this documentary last night was showing some of the footage of Rodney King.
Yeah.
And part of it was showing some pictures.
30 years ago.
Yeah.
So we're 30 years ago.
Yeah, when I was in school. I was in high school. And part of this was the just images of lynchings, right?
Yeah.
And, one thing that's always struck me, because I hear the other side of this, right?
Yeah.
Because I know my upbringing, right? I grew up in a very godly family that loves the Lord. But there are parts of my family that have been racist forever and will be racist forever. Unfortunately, sin has corrupted all of us. And so I've heard all the jokes growing up and listened to all this and caused actually some major division in my family for quite a few years. But as I'm watching this, I thought, I've never had to have a conversation with my kids about the fear of getting pulled over by a cop. I've never had to have a conversation with my boys about you could die today in the way that you respond when you see a police officer.
Yeah.
And that's a reality as a parent that you have to have conversations with your kids.
I want to take it one step further. It's a reality for me right now. When I left here yesterday, I was stopped on the bridge and they asked me, "Hey, where you going?" And I was afraid. Now, I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just trying to go home. I know they were trying to do their job. However, that fear was in me at that moment. I'm 55 years old. So it just isn't your son. It's every black man.
I'm watching the video of Rodney King, and there has never been in the history of this country a time where a white man has been laying on the ground with a dozen cops beating him with sticks. There's never been an image of a white man being lynched with black men standing around laughing and pointing. We grew up our kids here at Our Calling, and one day they'll be in therapy because of it, but we homeschooled our kids in a building full of homeless men and women. And one of the questions each kid has asked me at different stages of their life is, "Daddy, how come they're all black?" Right? How come the majority of the homeless population are black? And the best answer I can give them is, kids, these are the scars left from years of generational sin and generational prejudice and racism and slavery and depravity. These are the scars left on a community from things that have been happening to them for years and still happen to them today.
Yeah. And also just the scars of just inequality of our school system, church, parenting. We see it all here. And I think that until we have a real conversation about, this isn't a black problem. We want to give more government aid to black people. That is not the issue. The issue is, how do I treat my brother right, regardless of color? You were talking about those lynchings. There's a book that I hadn't pulled off my shelf in a long time, because it is, every time I see these images, it makes me angry. But I brought it today, and I want you to look at some of these images, Wayne. This book is called Without Sanctuary. And it's called Without Sanctuary because there is no place in America where a black person is safe. And these images find themselves in the Smithsonian, and someone made a book out of it. And as I was looking at it last night, I happened to find an image in that book of a man on March the 3rd, 1910, was drugged from the Dallas County Courthouse, and he was taken downtown Dallas, and he was lynched. It's in that book right there. And I'm thinking, I'm a proud Texan, but those are the things that happened in the city that I love. And so if that can happen, and if you continue to look, You will see women who were lynched.
This is a picture of a dad lynched with his sons.
Yes. And so as I'm looking at this book, and as for a long time, I didn't even let my kids look at the book because I said, no, they don't need to see these images.
And I agree with for kids, but as adults, it's important that we see this.
You need to see it because what you see here is a continuation of what we saw last Monday. It's the continuation. And so when you begin to see that I could do that to another human being, you got to ask yourself, what kind of heart do I have? And we all know you can't legislate the heart. But I've got to deal with, we have to deal with, how am I honest about how I feel about another person of another race? And how do I make the concerted effort to be a better person, particularly if we say our lives have been transformed by Jesus Christ? And that what's interesting is that many of them folks come from church.
Yeah, this is a picture of one on a postcard. In the back of it's a picture of a man that's been burnt to death. And on the back of it, it says, "This is the barbecue we had last night."
And look where that happened at. Where did that happen at?
Temple, Texas.
Temple, Texas. And so we have just a historical anthology of hatred, not only in our state that I love, but in our country. And as I was looking at that book, they had a picture of someone they lynched in Duluth, Minnesota. And I'm just like, oh my goodness, this is crazy.
One of the things, I wrote down a lot of quotes from James Baldwin. And at the very beginning of the documentary, he says, it is not a racial problem. It's a problem of whether or not you're willing to look at your life and be responsible for it and then begin to change it.
That's right.
And then he said later, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced.
And we have not made the choice to face it. We want to legislate it, but not until I make a choice first individually, and then at my house with my children at the dinner table. And we begin to say no, because there are different conversations that happen at the dinner table, that happen at school, that happen here, but not until those basic things happen and a choice is made that I'm going to be better, I'm going to do better by my brother. And then I've got to really make the choice that I am going to see this individual as my brother or sister. Because you look at these images and we read documentation, you know, when a black person is only considered to be 3/5 a person. So I'm not even human. So you don't even see me as an individual that could even interact with you.
Now, some people are going to watch this and say, well, that was considered 3/5 of a person a long time ago, and the lynchings happened a long time ago, and Jim Crow was a long time ago. And I agree, it's not today, but there's a lot that happens today even. Now, it's like, you know, unfortunately, you can't just say it's a few bad apples, right? There's a few bad people that are doing this, and most of the community is not like this because there's evidence of systematic racism. And look at Dallas, right? So Dallas has this area called Bonton that all minorities were required to live in. It's a floodplain. There's gates that close the area off because it floods.
Yeah.
And any white people or black people that try to move out of there, they would firebomb their houses and move them back there. The police wouldn't even go in there. If you had a problem, even a medical emergency, you would drag your family out for the ambulance or the police to pick you up, right? And we can talk about how bad that is, but even now in South Dallas, it's terrible. The crime rate is horrible. The houses are falling apart. There are neighborhoods that don't have running electricity. There's places that don't have good water. The schools down there are terrible. And so in order to fix it, Dallas put a PGA golf course in the middle of it. What in the world is that going to do? And these little bitty placated things that they think is going to fix it ends up making it worse. So they built this golf course, and now everybody who lives around there, the property taxes are going up and they can't afford their homes anymore, right?
Which means what? They have to move.
And there's nowhere to move because we've gentrified everything.
Absolutely.
In Dallas. You know, when we moved into the Cedars here, there was a lot of low-income housing. And since then, most of that's been torn down so they can build these, you know, huge lofts and stuff, which is good for people that want lofts, bad for the people that live there.
That's right.
You know, what can be done today? Now, we can talk about legislative and what can happen in the city and all this stuff. What can be done today by a man like Wayne and a man like Rodney practically to love our neighbors well?
Yeah, I think you need to serve humanity, but also I think you really need to really make an effort. You need to make an effort to really become friends with a person of another race. So, I mean, you know, my kids, it's not uncommon for us to have someone at our house who doesn't look like our house over for dinner. That's not an uncommon thing. But I remember going to parties at places that I would work, and I would only be the only black person at the party except for the people who were serving. And I'm like, I get in the car with my wife, and I would say, are we the only black people they know? Something about that is wrong. Because when I open my home and I open my life to other people, they begin to see something that most people don't get to see, and that is my heart. And when people get to see your heart, it changes the whole conversation. But when I can placate you and I can build a wall, or I can keep you behind the gates, because the same thing happened on the west side of Dallas. When I can keep you there, then I don't have to, as I said earlier, I don't have to enter into your reality, because I don't have to see how poor the schools are. I don't have to see how you work, but because of your station in life, you know, you don't make a living wage, and that's not fair. And so all of these things play into where we are as a nation.
One of the things that you alluded to with your kids and with friends is the dinner table.
Yeah.
So I hear white people say, well, I have a black friend, or I have black friends, and you just nailed them in the face. How often are they coming and having dinner with you? Is that the guy you're going to have a cigar with on your back porch? Is that the guy going to sit in your fishing boat or help you work on your car on the weekend? Is that the guy you're going to help move? And what I'm talking about is an intimate kind of relationship that's not just a placated, I have a black friend.
I'll tell you, so I'm thinking of my friend Tom. Tom and I have been friends over 15 years. My kids grew up with Tom, so they know Tom. And it would not, for them, it would not be uncommon. Tom's a pilot. So Tom would call me on a Christmas morning and say, hey man, what are y'all having? What are you cooking for Christmas dinner today? We're doing Mexican this year, Tom. It would not be uncommon for Tom to hop a flight from Dallas and come to Chicago and have dinner, Christmas dinner with us, sleep in our bed, and get back on the L and come back the next morning. That was not uncommon. And they didn't see Tom as being white. They saw Tom as being my friend because he had been around so long, and we had done things together, and he had helped me and I had helped him. And I think a healthy relationship matter of fact, before Tom got married, Tom brought his to-be wife to my house and asked my wife, what do you think? Tell me, what do you think about her? There has to be an equitable relationship. It isn't an uneven relationship, because Tom can speak into my life. I can speak into his life. I remember Tom coming over to my house for Easter dinner. And, you know, if you've ever been to a black function on Easter, it is an all-day affair. So there's church, and then there is the buffet that's laid out about noon, and it's on the table till about 7 o'clock at night. So Tom goes to church with us. He comes, he's at the house. We eat, we're playing games. And Tom sees about 4 different waves of people come through my house. There's the old people who come first, they eat, they leave. Then there's another group that come, they eat and leave. Then there's another group that comes. So it's about 7 o'clock. And so Tom pulls me to the side. He says, say, man, so I got a couple questions for you. I said, okay. I said, well, what's up? He said, so, man, I see this food has been on the table all day. Is that the same food? I said, no, they keep bringing it out. And he says, now you're just not doing that for me, are you? I said, no, Tom, this is how we roll. And he gets quiet and he says, he said, we don't, white people don't do this. We eat and we go home. I mean, y'all have made this an all-day gathering. I said, yeah, man. I said, because for us, most black people did not have enough food to eat. So one, when you had a gathering like this, you share it with everybody. It's a blessing, and it's just great to be with family. And he was like, And so he's thinking, and then he says, well, I got another question for you. I said, okay. And he says, well, can I come for Christmas? And so he got a chance to learn what it was like to be at a black function over the holidays. And he was like, wow, this is great. This is amazing that y'all would do this. And I said, yeah, man, this is how we grew up. This is what we do. But he made some effort to get in my world, and me the same. And I think because we fear what we don't know. And so people fear other individuals because they don't know them or what they have heard or what the stereotype is. And so because of that, it is easier to believe that than to make the effort to do the hard thing. And it is a hard thing to enter into relationship with, and you're married, right? You know that, right? If you've been married at least 2 days, you know it's hard to be in relationship, right? And so when you talking about crossing a line racially, it becomes even harder. But you gotta make the effort. And Tom, he would ask questions. Say, man, help me understand this. I don't want to say the wrong thing, man. So just help me understand that. And I think because white people never have to enter into the black world unless they want to, it is easy for them to not to. But here's the thing. My world is always tied to your world. If I want to work well, I got to go into the white world. If I want to shop well, I got to go up to North Dallas. If I want to eat well, I got to go up to North Dallas. But you never have to come past the Trinity unless you want to. That's the difference. I'm just using Dallas as an example, but that is played out in every major city across the United States. Every city I've gone to and lived at, it is broken up into that line. And you find the line and say, okay, well, help me understand this about the city. And it's broken up the same. And until we make the decision that we're going to be Americans, we're still going to have this problem. I'm in Munich, Germany. I'm in Munich. I'm at a coffee shop. I'm sitting down. I'm having some coffee. This guy speaks German. He comes up to me. He says, "Excuse me." This is what he says. "Are you an American? I want to know about America." He didn't say, "Are you black?" He said, "Are you an American?" And in that instance, I realized I've got to go outside of my country to be recognized as an American versus being black. And that conversation I had with him has been over 30 years, 35 years, sitting in that little roadside coffee shop with this guy who just wanted to know about America. And I don't think most Americans see black people as Americans. They just see us as appendixes, addendums, add-ons.
And
that has to change.
It's interesting that you say that because you were a captain in the Army.
Yeah.
Right? So you have a military career, and for you to say that you have not been seen as an American, but as an addendum.
Yeah.
A man who was in active duty, who was in active combat zone, who fought for his country.
Yes.
Doesn't feel like an American.
It's just, and I think one of the things, Wayne, that makes it so difficult is I think a lot of white people don't even realize what they do. It is so commonplace that they don't even realize that they have just saw another person and made them invisible because they've done it so long. They don't even realize it.
Give me some practical examples.
Man, I can be at a store and I can actually be talking to the clerk and someone will come up and who's white, he'll just start talking to the clerk as if I'm not even there. And if I would say something, if I would say, "Hey, what's wrong with you?" They would say, why are you so angry? Because they don't even realize the disrespect that they have just presented and broadcasted.
There's a quote from the movie about this double standard.
Yeah.
And I want to read it here. He said, and this is James Baldwin, he said, when the Israelis pick up guns, or the Poles, or the Irish, or any white man in the world, and says, "Give me liberty or give me death," the entire white world applauds.
Yeah.
But when a black man says the exact same thing, word for word, he is judged a criminal, treated like one, and everything possible is done to set him as an example of this bad guy, so there won't be any more like him.
Yeah.
Not exactly the words he used.
You got to watch the You got to watch the documentary.
It's on Amazon Prime.
Yeah.
It's great. It's heartbreaking, but it's very educational. But the double standard for, I love this, for a white guy to say, holding the gun, say, give me liberty, give me death, we applaud him.
Yeah.
In history of fighting for civil rights, if a black man would have done the same thing, he would have been made as an example. And we just know that. And we see that. And we see that historically. We even see that today when often brutality happens to someone. It's, I'm going to set them as an example so the rest of them don't. They get the word, we don't, you don't mess with us, kind of a thing.
And one of the things that I love about the documentary is that it's able to provide a framework of the life of Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, and Dr. King. And so all of these individuals who are leaders who were revered by white America, and we saw what happened to them. And so he's able to make, such a pointed point on the video.
One of the things he said there is, the quote, the most segregated moment in America is Sunday morning.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that it was Malcolm X who said that. I hear white people say that all the time, as though, we're going to fix it all by just inviting some people of color different our church, we're going to, but it was Malcolm X who said that.
Yeah.
Now, obviously Malcolm X's methodology of leading change was different than Martin Luther King's methodology of leading change.
Yeah.
But because of that methodology, I've always heard of Malcolm X growing up as vilified.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. But if you continue to watch the video, if you remember, James said how both of their positions began to meet. And in the end, they were at the same position. And I think that is one of the things that white America does. They vilify a person when they are telling the truth. I mean, I think there are many things that Malcolm X said that was truth. He was a truth teller. And it is very difficult for someone to be your conscience. And you're just like, man, they're telling the truth about me. And I don't like what they're saying.
My kids had a second set of grandparents. About 15, 18 years ago, when we bought our first house in Dallas, it was in East Dallas, we moved in across the street from this dear couple, Ray and Maddie Jones. Ray was the mascot of the Cowboys for years and years and years. But we got to know them as neighbors and friends. And we also got to know them as a couple that their lights were getting turned off, their water was getting cut off, they were in destitution. And, I don't want to go into what all happened there, but for a while, Ray went into the hospital, nursing home. I used to take him down with me to serve the homeless. He'd fold balloons and tell jokes and tell stories. But for a while there, Maddie actually moved in with us.
Okay.
So we had a black grandmother living in our home for a couple months. I don't remember how long it was. But, it was just an extension of course, she can come move in with us while they're working on the house, because we were so close to her for many, many years. And it was such a great experience for my kids. But what was more surprising is when their friends would come over. Their friends would come over to come hang out, do whatever, and they would see her and wonder who she is and why she's there. Obviously, you're going to always ask that when you see someone in someone's house, but their reaction was often very negative. Yeah. Even some of the words they would say. And it was very, very surprising. My kids growing up at our calling, growing up in some of the other things we've done, and growing up with, family and friends that, I have a sister-in-law who is married to an African-American man, and there was a huge divide in the family when they got married. They fell in love, and he's a great man of God. She's a great woman of God, but who cares? It's a man and a woman that fell in love, regardless of skin color, they got married, and there was some extreme tension in the family because of that.
Yeah.
On one side of my family. The other side of my family, growing up, I would have been disowned by part of my family if I would have ever dated a black girl. And I was told that, right? I remember I think I told you the story one time. We were in Selma, Alabama. My grandfather used to take me to all the Civil War museums and all these sites. And
I've been to Selma.
To hear all the different versions of the stories. But anyway, we get out and we go into this little munitions depot there on the side of the bridge.
Yeah.
And while we're there, there's women marching across the bridge, doing the march again. And, people, I guess, like to go march across that bridge on a regular basis. I don't know. I'm a little punk kid. But we go in this munitions depot, and, it's fun because you see these musket balls and cannonballs and all this stuff and all the cases. But I remember, and I'll remember this for the rest of my life, we were looking in this one case, and in this one case was a bill of sale. A bill of sale for a person. And I remember seeing that, and I will never get that image out of my mind. All the jokes I'd heard all my life, all the words that I'd heard being used in that moment, it meant something different when I saw a receipt for a human.
I think, Wayne, the epiphany that you had, very few people have. And it's because they don't want to go deep. They don't want to deal with this, man. That is something that happened so long ago. Why are we still talking about that? And what is very difficult for people to understand is when you have abused people for 400 years, there's a lot of collateral damage. And there's a lot of things that cannot be rewritten. But there has to be a time and place where we hit the reset button and say, you know what? Enough is enough. And when we have a president that speaks the rhetoric that he speaks, that doesn't help. When we can clearly see, I just finished a book, Wayne, just a week ago called When Affirmative Action Was White. And it talks about all of the programs that were set out for every American to enjoy, but how Southern legislators were able to massage that thing to make it only a white thing. And so all of the trickery, all the shell games, they gotta stop. And not until people who go to church every Sunday have lead the way, it won't change.
But it's not just the South.
No,
when I read the history of the Civil War after the Emancipation Proclamation and years later when slaves were finally freed, the North didn't want him either, and they still treated him like a second-class citizen. It's
as I said earlier, it is so deep in the fabric of America.
Well, you listen to problems like this and you think, man, can it ever get better? I mean, it just seems like every few months there's another cycle of another abuse, right? Another situation where someone is abused. And, I I don't like the rhetoric of, well, there's more white people killed by cops than black people. Well, there's a whole lot more white people in the country than black people. So get over your numbers. You don't have black cops holding a white person down by their throat for 9 minutes as they beg for breath. I mean, that just doesn't happen, right? But you look at the history of all of our jails are full of black men, right? They're full of men who have generational abuse that has come from this. And then we get to where we are today in 2020, you and I sitting here on a couch at our calling, where most of the people that walk in our front doors, are homeless, are black.
They're black.
Most of the people that come in our back doors as volunteers
are white.
What can we do in this community to bridge the gap? Because for white people to help the black community does not mean come to our calling and give someone a sandwich.
No, it doesn't.
Right? It doesn't mean pass something out your window to the guy on the corner, right? What can we do practically, and what would we invite people to come down to our calling and experience that would be different than just a day of service that would actually open a dialogue for race?
Yeah, I would love to see our white brothers and sisters and come down to sit at the table and to just have a cup of coffee and a conversation. Don't bring the camera for a soundbite to take back to your church.
No Instagram moment.
No, don't do that. Don't do that, because you just make yourself feel good and you've already gotten your reward. But come down and sit at that table and look that woman in the eye, or look that man in the eye, and just say these words after you've greeted them. Will you just share some of your story with me? Because I want to tell you, every time I do that, I'm reminded of a person who made one bad mistake, or they didn't get the parenting that they needed. And because of that, they're here. And I'm reminded that this could be me. And it just reminds me, when I see the tears when they tell me their story, that person didn't wake up this morning and say, you know what? I'm glad that I'm homeless today. And I'm reminded that I can be the hands and feet of Jesus, not by just handing out a sandwich, but asking a couple questions. One, how can I pray for you? And then number two, do you have a relationship with Jesus Christ? That's what they can do. That's the great start. And then number two, for my black brothers and sisters, I want to see you down here more. God has blessed so many of our African-American brothers and sisters who have done really well and who have retired, and they can be here. And so I would like to see more of a representation from that standpoint as well.
You know, before you joined our staff, I felt like I was constantly pestering you, asking those questions. What can we do to get more African-American involvement in the homeless community from the service side?
Yeah.
Right? And then what can we do to serve? Because I don't know what I don't know, right? I know my experiences and what I've been taught and what I see from my eyes, but I have no idea what the world looks like from someone else's eyes. You made a great observation there. We were talking about homelessness. No one wakes up in the morning and says, I think I want to be homeless today.
Yeah.
And I'm so sick of the dialogue that people choose to be homeless. That's such a load, because any day, anybody out here, if given the choice, would choose to sleep in your house in your bed.
Absolutely.
They would love to stay inside somewhere, right? And going back to what you said about parenting and childhood, most of the causes, the root core of why someone became homeless started before they were 10 years old, right? And when we have a overpopulation of a particular subset of our community, then we've got to recognize that maybe something's happening before the age of 10 years old for this community. And not only how do we get involved here at our calling with homeless adults, but what can we do to serve the community of children in this city that need brothers and sisters and grandpas and uncles and aunts and people actively involved in their lives? Listening to your stories, your mother-in-law, right? She would go to the school and sit surrounded by a room full of kids in all colors.
That's right.
And she would open up a book and read to these children. Yeah.
Even at 84 years old, she was still a grandmother for Head Start. So she was still getting up, trying to be engaged. I think one of the things that breaks my heart is when I take a guy's order and I put his date of birth in, and I see this guy was born September the 1st, 1965. And I'm like, this cat's my age. And I realize he can't read. And I'm thinking, what happened? Something happened to where he didn't get the tools that he needed to be able to compete in life. And that's a travesty. That has to change. And so you're right, it is tutoring at a school. It is parenting. It's all of the basic foundational pieces that are needed to become a productive citizen in our country. And somewhere along the line, somebody said, it's okay for this group of people to not get what they need, and this group over here can get it. Something about that is fundamentally wrong. And until those pieces change, I think we will continue to get what we're getting. And I can remember growing up in a bad neighborhood. But I want to tell you, I had some strong teachers that demanded excellence of me. And that made a difference. So it did not matter what was around me, but it mattered that I had teachers that had high expectations of me. And somewhere along the line, we have said it's okay that they fail. And most of those people look like me, and something about that is wrong.
I remember when the first time I toured the Turnaround Agenda, which is the outreach ministry of Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship, I went and toured. They have a thrift store there, not because they want to sell thrift, because they recognize that people that have needs that will go to a thrift store they can minister to. So they're sitting there with a mom walks in and she's crying because she can't afford, uniforms for her kids for school. That is a ministry opportunity. They have a bank there that they created. It's I think more like a credit union to help people get an honest loan and set up credit on themselves. Okay. They have a pregnancy resource center. It's funny because it looks like the Thrive Pregnancy Resource Center, except the little rubber babies are different colors, But when I was talking to them about the Pregnancy Resource Center part, and they actually created a STD clinic, it's because when they started the church, they recognized that the teen pregnancy and the level of STDs in that zip code were some of the highest in the entire country.
Yeah.
Right? And what can they do to be actively involved in that community and to start at an earlier age to help people grow? The church, God did not put the church here just to teach theology. God put the church here to be the body of Christ.
Yeah.
And Jesus was fellowshipping with people. He's eating with people. He was healing people. He was playing with the kids. He went to the wedding. He was actively involved in people's lives while he led them to the Lord. But he wasn't just serving food because he wanted to open up a McDonald's, but he was using that in context of leading people to the Father through himself.
Yeah.
And as a church, God calls us to do so much more than just, speak on Sunday at the pulpit, which is important, right? We have to have that sacred moment. But God also calls us to walk out of the church and serve the community on a broader level.
And do some hard things and see some hard things and be in some hard places.
So that documentary again, I Am Not Your Negro.
Yeah. By James Baldwin.
Samuel L. Jackson is
he's the
narrator of it.
Yeah.
Great. It's on Prime Video for free if you have a Prime account, or you can rent it. Here's one of the quotes I got from the end of the movie. He says, "History is not the past, it is the present. We carry our history with us. We are our history.
Yeah.
If we pretend otherwise, we literally are criminals." The experience that you face daily is a result of history.
Yeah.
Yesterday, you left work and you said you got stopped by police officers and you immediately get nervous.
Yeah.
That is because of 400 years of history.
Yeah.
That is punctuated on the news and social media on a regular basis.
Absolutely.
What do we need to be praying for specifically?
I think we need to be praying for, most of our churches have small groups. And in these small groups, we need to be praying, one, for our nation, what's going on in race relations. And then I think in those groups, they need to be praying about how that group can serve somewhere to make the issue better. Two, I think we need to be praying for our own salvation. Paul talks about that we all should be working out our own salvation. I think this is a part of that working out of,
that sanctification process.
The sanctification process. And, in Amos chapter 5, verses 21 through 24, Dr. King, he quotes these passages throughout the I Have a Dream speech and throughout many other speeches. It's Amos chapter 5, 21 through 24. And in those passages, Amos talks about what God is not going to listen to anymore. He says, I'm not going to listen to the band anymore. I'm not going to listen to the music anymore. And I sure don't want any more choice sacrifices. I'm not listening to that anymore. I think each one of us have to ask the question, God, is my life worth you listening to? Because the whole book is about how the Jewish people had engaged in injustice. And he says, not until you get on board with my program, with justice and mercy, will I listen to you. And I've got to ask myself, is my life worth God listening to in regards to being a justice or a just community? And I think that's what you have to pray for in your own life. And, in Psalm 131, David is clear when he says, God, reveal to me what's in my heart. Am I ready for God to reveal in me those things that don't look like him in regards to justice and mercy? And I think if you can pray those two prayers, that'll give you enough to work on.
So Rodney, as we finish up here, I'd love for you to just give some words directly to the Black community. What would you encourage them or challenge people to do?
Two things. One, they need to get involved and engaged in their community at some level. Serving, tutoring, being a part of what we're doing here. But there needs to be a level of service that needs to be given back. And then number two, I would encourage African Americans to really make and strive to engage in an intimate relationship with someone that doesn't look like them. A white family, an Indian family, but someone who doesn't look like them outside of the work relationship. So what does that mean? That means having someone over to your house for dinner. That may mean doing some type of activity with someone outside of the work relationship, because not until we engage at a deeper level will we be able to ask and answer some hard questions.
And I would like to add to that. I want to encourage white families who listen to this and who, want to be participatory in what we're doing at Our Calling and want to be involved in their community, just to pause for a moment and think, if there's a group of people that are so disenfranchised and feel so excluded that they feel that their lives don't matter enough that they have to create an entire movement just to communicate that Black lives matter, that we would pause and we would listen and not start all the propaganda that, yes, all lives matter. We get that. But if your brother feels that he's been wronged by you, then listen. Go have coffee with someone. Invite them to your home. Take them out on your boat. Smoke a cigar with them on your back porch. Listen. Don't just post stupid things on Facebook and get involved in that kind of discussion. And I'm sick and tired of the conversation of, well, I've got Black friends. Why don't you just have friends and pursue men and women in healthy, intimate relationships where you can have conversations around a dinner table where you can learn from their experiences. If people feel that their lives don't matter enough, that they have to wear it on a t-shirt and put it on a poster, then maybe we should do whatever it takes to show them and prove to them that their lives matter. I'm going to quote from the book Tattoos on the Heart. And instead of judging people by the way they carry their burdens, let's understand the burdens that they carry. right? Understanding them and their needs and how abused they feel, watching their community being abused and tormented and tortured on TV by people that are sworn to protect us.
Yeah.
Now, I've got a lot of friends in the law enforcement. I've got a lot of friends and peers that work in the police department and other areas of law enforcement. They are good people. I value what they do. But those are some bad cops. But there's also bad plumbers. There's bad pastors. There's bad politicians, probably a lot of them. There's a lot of bad people, right? And the opportunity for us is to recognize that every single one of us is responsible for the choices that we make. That we have to own our apathy. We have to own our own personal guilt. We have to own the historic racism that is in our own blood and in our own families. And until we show up and bow at the feet of people and beg their forgiveness, until we show up and shut our mouths and listen, will we ever get to know someone and we ever start to heal this land? You know, God says, if my people who are called by my name will do what? Humble themselves.
And pray.
And pray. And this is what we need to do. Not only humbling ourselves to the Lord, but humbling ourselves to each other to recognize that we have wronged them. I guarantee somewhere in my family and my history were some people that were signing those bills of sale from people in your family. And I have to own that even though I didn't do it, I never owned a slave, I've never worn a hood, that I represent a people that have. And I have to own my inherited guilt. The sins of the father on the son, I inherited that sin. I inherited that guilt. And I have to do everything in my power to seek amends with a brother who's been wronged.
Amen.
You know, Christian maturity means that you're the first one to say, I'm sorry. Even when you don't know what you did. As a pastor, I apologize for lots of things. I don't know what I did.
Yeah.
And things I don't even know what happened.
And I know we're about to close our time. It is just important for, I think, you know, Wayne, for our white brothers and sisters to understand that you're absolutely right. You know, they didn't own a slave, but because someone did, they benefited from that. And not until there is an acknowledgement that they benefit from it, it doesn't help us move the conversation forward. In my home, in my front living room, I have 2 documents that I found that hang on my wall that I think are probably the most 2 prized possessions that I have. And they are they're poll receipts from 1937 and 1938. And my grandmother and my grandfather's poll tax receipts, which meant that they were property owners. And they had to pay taxes to go to the poll, because they were black, to vote. And I'm thinking, it's 1937. How in the world were they able to own property in the Great Depression? But some kind of way, they did it, and they paid that $1.25 for the poll tax to vote. And every time I see that, it reminds me of the determination that they had to make a better life for my mother and my aunt. And because of what they did, I benefited from that.
As we close, Rodney, I'm going to ask you to pray. Will you pray for our broken country?
Father, you want justice to roll down in our land. You want reconciliation between brothers and sisters. You want us to put off old ways and put on new ways. And Father, we pray you would heal the land. We pray you would help us seek your face. And Father, I pray you would help us join hands as brothers and sisters. And be the kind of people that you're calling in these last and evil and perverse days. Let your people lead the way. Let us be the beacon of hope for a time that seems to be hopeless right now. We bless your name. It's in your Son's name we do pray. Amen.
Amen. I love you, man. Thanks for doing this.
My pleasure.